Hey everyone, welcome back to LGBT Stories, your go-to channel for emotional, romantic, and sometimes heart-wrenching tales from the LGBT community. Today, we have a story that will take you on an unexpected journey. It's a story about forbidden desires, unexpected connections, and the complexities of love. Are you ready to dive into a tale that will leave you both shocked and moved? Let's get started. When Mom was away, I never expected things to happen the way they did, let alone become so exciting. My dad and I ended up doing something I could never have imagined. It turned into the wildest, most unforgettable day of my life. It all started after Mom had to leave for a business trip. As her car pulled away, the house felt different. The engine's roar faded, replaced by an unsettling silence. It wasn't just the lack of her chatter. The air felt heavier, and the stillness pressed down on me. Something was about to change, and I could feel it. Dad stood beside me, his hand resting on my shoulder. His fingers were warm, and for a moment, the gesture felt deeper than usual. It was an acknowledgement of the space left by Mom's departure. He withdrew his hand, rubbing his neck, but I saw a look in his eyes, something unfamiliar, something unspoken. He didn't smile, and neither did I. We just looked at each other, the silence growing until it became unbearable. "Well," Dad said, his voice low, filling the quiet house. His gaze flicked toward the kitchen. "Guess it's just us then." He moved before I could respond, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as he headed to the kitchen. I followed, and the smell of coffee he had made before Mom left filled the room. It brought me a sense of comfort. We both knew this was an unusual situation. I watched him. His movements felt familiar, but now carried a new awareness. His strong, muscular arms, shaped by years in the gym, moved effortlessly as he took out the cups. I couldn't help but linger on them for a moment. He was older, for sure. The gray hair at his temples was more noticeable, and the lines around his eyes were deeper. Yet this made him seem more rugged and captivating. I hadn't seen him like this before. I caught myself staring again and immediately looked away, my cheeks burning as he sat on the opposite side of the table. He poured the coffee, and his fingers brushed my hand when he passed the cup. The simple touch sent a shiver down my spine, a wave of heat rushing through me. We looked at each other again, and the silence that followed was deafening. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, though my voice was a little too high-pitched for comfort. "What do we do now?" I hated the way that sounded, but it was already out. He looked at me, a small grin appearing on his face. "Well, I suppose we could try and get some work done," he answered, his eyes looking into mine and making me shift a bit in my seat. Or, he continued with a suggestive tone in his voice and a different gaze than before, "We could just, I don't know, see what happens now that it's just us." He stopped, probably to see my reaction. I did not expect that line of speech, and I had no idea what to answer. I simply shifted in my chair, trying not to be affected by his words. I focused on the dark ripples in my coffee, watching cream spiral into abstract patterns as I stirred. Neither of us spoke for minutes. The clink of my spoon against the ceramic echoed too loudly in the silence. His presence across the table made me feel a sudden unease. My skin prickled, and my hands weren't quite steady as I set the spoon down. When I finally gathered the courage to look up, I found him watching me with an expression I'd never seen before, something raw and unguarded that made my breath catch. In his eyes, I saw my own confusion mirrored back at me, along with something else that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. A glimpse of possibility that was both thrilling and terrifying. We finished our coffee in silence, the tension only growing with each passing moment. When he stood, the movement drew my attention. The way his muscles flexed under his shirt was impossible to ignore. "I suppose I have some work to do." "Maybe you do too," he said, his voice calmer now, although I could still detect a note of that same intensity. I nodded, finally breaking our eye contact as I was getting a bit overwhelmed. "Yeah, I guess I should get back to it too." I walked toward the door, but was suddenly stopped. His hand rested softly on my shoulder again, and I looked back at him. "Hey," he whispered, stepping closer to me. "We should have dinner here later, and maybe watch a movie or something." His voice was a lot softer now, and his eyes were filled with something I couldn't understand. "Sure," I said, feeling myself blush, though I had no idea why. I stepped away from his hand, and he took it back quickly. "I have to go," I said, and rushed out of the kitchen. My heart was pounding in my chest. I was sure that he could feel it, or at least see it on my face. I was confused and also kind of excited, a strange mix of emotions that I had never experienced before. I walked up the stairs and could feel his gaze on me. When I reached my room, I closed the door and could finally breathe, but even though I closed the door, his image stayed in my mind. His touch, his look, everything. It was as if something had shifted between us. Something forbidden had awakened, and something was about to change. It was exciting, but little did I know I was about to be lost for words. The afternoon dragged on, each hour feeling longer than the last. The silence in the house made my thoughts feel louder. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake off Dad's words, the way he looked at me, and the tone in his voice. It all made it hard for me to concentrate. I kept replaying the moment he touched my shoulder, the warmth of his hand still on my skin. I knew I should think of something else, but I couldn't help but imagine it all again. I kept glancing at the clock as the minutes ticked by, and with each moment that passed, my anticipation intensified. My chest was getting tighter and tighter. I wondered if he was feeling the same, if he too was struggling with the new reality that was building up between us. It was a thought that both excited and scared me. While I was alone in my room, I knew he was in his office, and I could feel his presence even with the walls between us. The more I thought about him, the more that silence began to feel less empty, more expectant. What happened next was something I could never have imagined. As dusk settled, it painted the sky orange and purple. I made my way downstairs, my heart pounding with every step, but I couldn't stop myself. The house was still, except for the faint sound of the TV from the living room. My hands were starting to sweat. I found him on the couch, his gaze fixed on the screen, but he seemed distant, lost in his world. The way he was sitting on the couch, so relaxed yet so alert, was making me feel confused, and my mind went to places that were certainly off limits. His legs were stretched in front of him, and I couldn't help but notice his thighs, his muscles flexing slightly. All I could think about was how it would feel to touch them. But then, as soon as I entered the room, he noticed me. He turned his head, searching for my eyes. It felt like he was suddenly more aware of my presence. "Hey," he said, his voice a bit lower than before, and he gestured toward the space on the couch next to him. "Come sit." I sat down, careful to leave a small gap between us, but it felt weird, and my body was asking for me to go closer to him. I tried to focus on the television, but my mind was racing, analyzing every little movement he made, every subtle shift in his gaze. The air was thick with tension, the unspoken desires hanging in the space between us, and I could barely breathe. I knew that he could feel it too. I was sure of it, but neither of us dared to speak about it. Instead, we sat there, two people trapped in a forbidden dance. The more we stayed in that silence, the louder our thoughts became. So he began breaking the silence. He leaned back against the couch, his arms stretching out behind me, but not quite touching. "What have you been up to all day?" His eyes were on the screen, but I could feel his gaze on me, a constant presence that was making me feel uneasy yet excited. "Nothing much," I answered, trying to sound as casual as possible, but my voice trembled slightly, revealing the truth. I stopped for a moment, wondering if I should tell him more, if I should mention what I was truly feeling. I took a quick glance at him. He was looking at me, not at the TV anymore, and his eyes were filled with curiosity. "Difficult?" he asked, turning his body towards me and moving closer, so his leg was touching mine. The casual contact made me flinch slightly, my heart starting to beat faster. "Why?" He was waiting for me to say it, to finally let the unspoken desires out. I looked down at my hands, playing with my fingers, trying to find the right words, but it was too difficult because all the words were forbidden, and I knew I could not say them out loud. "It's nothing," I finally said, and I knew that I was lying, but I couldn't help it. I had to protect us. He stood up abruptly, pulling me with him without a word. We moved towards the stairs. "Come on," he said, his voice a lot softer now, and his fingers brushed against my arm as he moved closer to me. The casual touch was sending sparks all over my body. You can tell me, he was challenging me, daring me to open up. Part of me, the forbidden part, wanted to give in, to let him know what I was thinking about, but another part of me was afraid of the consequences of what might happen if we crossed that line. I looked up at him. Our eyes met, revealing a mix of longing and curiosity. I felt the same way, mirroring his emotions. It's just, I started, pausing to let the weight of my words settle. I knew this moment would change everything. I feel weird, it's just us two here. My words were vague, but we both understood the deeper meaning behind them. He was looking at me, waiting for more. I knew that I could not hold back anymore, not now. I took a deep breath and took a gamble. It's different. I've never felt this way before, with you being so close. I stopped, leaving the words unsaid and hoping that he would get the message. His eyes darkened, the intensity there again, and he moved even closer. His leg pressed against mine, and his hand now rested on my knee. The touch burned through my jeans, and I could barely breathe. Different how? He whispered, his voice a husky murmur. His eyes were locked on mine, and the intensity was almost unbearable. For a moment, I thought that everything would stop, but then he leaned in, his face inches from mine, his gaze searching my eyes. Tell me, he whispered again. His touch was like fire, igniting all those forbidden thoughts in my head, and I wanted him closer. I yearned to surrender, but not yet. The unthinkable was coming. My breath hitched at his words. My heart pounded against my ribs, each beat echoing in the charged silence of the living room. The air between us grew heavier with every passing second. His face was so close now, his eyes locked on mine, and I could see it mirrored in his gaze. The same desire, the same forbidden longing that had taken hold of me. It felt as though we were standing on the edge of a precipice, teetering over something vast and irreversible, something that would change everything. We both knew there was no going back now, and yet neither of us wanted to. His hand on my knee tightened ever so slightly, the heat of his touch searing through the fabric and into my skin. A shiver ran down my spine, sharp and electric. The intensity of it was almost too much to bear. It was thrilling, dizzying, and I couldn't resist it. I didn't want to resist it. The tension between us swelled, thick and almost suffocating. The unspoken words, the forbidden thoughts, the underlying pull, they all surged toward their inevitable breaking point. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of it all settle over me. My heart hammered, every nerve in my body on fire, as I readied myself to give in, to cross the line that had been haunting us. Different like this, I whispered, my voice barely a sound. I leaned in, closing the small gap between us. My lips brushed against his, a soft, hesitant touch. Heat washed over me, my body yearning for more. He moaned against my lips, as if he felt the same. The kiss deepened. His hand moved from my knee to my cheek, fingers tracing the curve of my jaw. That simple touch sent sparks all over me. It felt like we'd been waiting for this moment forever. Now that it had finally come, I didn't want it to stop, and neither did he. I pulled back slightly, my breath ragged, my eyes searching his. His eyes were darker than before, filled with raw desire. He didn't say a word, and neither did I. Instead, he kissed me again, this time more passionately. My hands moved through his hair, pulling him closer, wanting to feel him against me, wanting to drown in this forbidden moment. My whole body was buzzing with a strange mixture of fear and excitement, a feeling I had never experienced before. We were in our own world now. Everything had disappeared, and the only thing that mattered was what we felt. We shouldn't. I managed to whisper, breaking the kiss for a moment, but I didn't move away, and neither did he. His hand moved down my arm, intertwining with mine. He looked at me, his eyes pleading. I know, he whispered back, his voice husky. His touch was making me dizzy, but I don't want to stop, he added. It was like we were having a conversation, even without speaking. His eyes were locked on mine, his gaze intense, and my resistance was fading with each passing second. I knew that I was about to cross a line from where there would be no return. His hands were caressing my arms, and he started to kiss my neck. His hands kept exploring my body, and I just went with it, further into the unknown, further into the forbidden. My heart pounded, my body trembled with anticipation. I knew this was not just desire. It was something deeper, long brewing between us, now finally exploding. We reached his bedroom, and the door closed behind us with a soft click. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the room. The room was not like mine. It was bigger, felt masculine, and it smelled of him. I felt like I was home. That was a crazy thought. Then he turned to me, his gaze intense. His hands reached for mine again. His lips brushed against mine. The kiss sent a jolt of electricity through me. I melted against him, surrendering to his touch, the forbidden and an intense feeling I'd never felt before. His hands moved down to my waist, pulling me closer. I felt his body pressed against mine. The warmth of his skin burned through my clothes. It was so hot, so exciting, so wrong, and yet so right. "Are you sure?" he whispered, breaking the kiss. His eyes searched mine. It was a plea, not a question, but I knew what he wanted to hear. So I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I whispered back, pulling him in for another kiss. This time it was more passionate and desperate. We had both reached the point of no return. He moaned against my lips. The kisses turned into something more, something much more intense. We reached the bed and fell into it. Then the world disappeared. Next, we did things I can't even describe. It was crazy but amazing. I even get excited when I think back on it. He turned me around, and yeah, it was just amazing. I have no other words for it. When he finished, we both just lay there, realizing what had just happened. "Are you okay, son?" Dad asked. "Yes, thank you, Dad," I replied. We were silent for a moment. The room was dimly lit. The bedside lamp cast long shadows on the walls. The room smelled of us, a reminder of our recent actions. We lay tangled in the sheets, our bodies still humming with aftershocks of passion. The silence was heavy, charged with unasked questions and unacknowledged desires. My heart was still pounding in my chest, but it was a different kind of pounding now. It was no longer just desire. It was a mix of guilt, confusion, and a strange exhilaration. I glanced at him, my eyes searching his. He was staring at the ceiling, his expression unreadable, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. I wondered if he felt the same mix of emotions that made my heart beat faster. I tried to break the silence, but my voice was stuck in my throat. The words wouldn't come out. "That was almost thrilling," he started, finally breaking the silence. He turned his head towards me, his eyes searching mine with a mischievous glint. "What was that?" He didn't sound angry. Not at all, but there was a layer of playful curiosity in his voice. I couldn't help but wonder if he was just as excited as me, and a smile appeared on my face. I knew that we had messed up, but I also loved it. I looked away, a small laugh escaping my lips. The weight of our actions pressed down on me, yet also excited me. "I don't know," I whispered, my voice trembling slightly, but with a clear tone of excitement and a slight glimpse of what we both felt. I still don't understand any of it. It was wild. I stopped for a moment, letting the words sink in, letting him know that I wasn't regretting what had just happened. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my arm. His touch was gentle, almost teasing, sending shivers down my spine. His gaze was getting a lot more intense. "Did it feel wrong to you?" He was waiting for my answer, his eyes fixed on me. I knew that I had to be honest, not just with him, but with myself too. But the honest answer was complicated. I closed my eyes for a moment, trying to grasp the complexity of my emotions, the mixture of guilt and desire, the fear and exhilaration that I could feel. My cheeks burned with a mix of shame and excitement. "It did," I finally said, my voice cracking slightly, a clear sign that I had been deeply affected by all this. "It didn't. It was messed up, so incredibly messed up, but it also felt amazing." I stopped, a small grin appearing on my face. I knew that we were still in sync, that we were both feeling the same. He pulled me closer, his arm around my body, his lips pressed softly against my forehead. His touch gave me some comfort, and it also showed our growing connection. "I feel it too," he whispered, his voice a husky murmur. It's crazy, I know, but I can't help it. It's like we're both on a different planet now, and the rules are different. I also know that I want to explore this planet a bit more." His words sent a jolt through my body. I looked up at him. His eyes were intense, so full of desire, and I knew that I wanted to do the same. The forbidden desire that had brought us together was still there, stronger than ever, and the thought of it made my heart beat faster. We lay in silence, our bodies intertwined. Thoughts raced through my mind. I felt the weight of our actions heavy on us both. Yet there was something else, a pull, an irresistible temptation. I couldn't stop thinking about the future and all its possibilities. Excitement built within me, and I yearned for more. I snuggled closer to him, burying my face in his chest. The warmth of his skin was sending sparks all over my body. I wanted him, and I knew that he wanted me too, and that made me smile. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, but filled with a certain level of thrill that I hadn't felt before. He sighed and ran his hand through my hair. He kissed my head again, sparking excitement in me. "I have no idea," he said, his voice playfully uncertain. Then he took my face in his hands and gave me a passionate kiss. "But I know I don't want this to end. I can't pretend nothing happened, and I don't want to be anywhere else." His words were a challenge, a call to explore this new reality that had emerged, and I knew that I couldn't resist. I nodded. The excitement bubbled in my chest. We looked at each other, and nothing else needed to be said. The connection that we now shared was something very powerful, something very strong. We got dressed in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts. The unspoken desires hung in the air, and the tension that had brought us together was still there, but it was now laced with something else, a thrill, an excitement for the unknown. I knew that we were about to embark on a new journey, a dangerous and forbidden one, but one that was also incredibly exciting. It was not the end. What happened next left me frozen. The next morning, I walked down the stairs. Morning sunlight filtered through the windows, casting long shadows on the living room floor. It was as if the events of the night before had left an imprint here. There was a lingering echo of passion, desire, forbidden thrill, and guilt woven into the walls. I knew nothing would ever be the same again. I could hear Dad in the kitchen. The clatter of pans was familiar, yet now it carried a new awareness. My heart skipped a beat as I approached the doorway. He stood there, his back to me, muscles flexing as he moved. The sight of him sent a shiver down my spine, a mix of excitement and anticipation. I could no longer deny it. He turned when he heard me enter. Our eyes met, and a faint smile played on his lips. "Morning," he said, his voice lower than usual, sending shivers through my body. "Sleep okay?" The question was loaded, and we both knew it. It was an acknowledgement of what had happened, and of what might happen again. A thrill pulsed through me. "Yeah," I answered, trying to sound casual, but my voice trembled slightly, betraying the truth. He could see right through me, and I knew that he could feel it too. The connection that we shared was something I couldn't deny. He nodded, his gaze lingering on mine for a moment. His eyes held a mix of desire and uncertainty. I knew we were both thinking about the same thing. The forbidden had been tasted, and the desire for more was clear in his eyes. I could feel myself yearning for it again. "We need to talk," he said, and I nodded. We both knew it. We sat at the kitchen table, where it all began, where the tension first built. The silence was heavy, filled with unspoken desires and fears. We felt trapped in a cycle, returning to the same place and feelings. The only change was our understanding of the forbidden path ahead. We couldn't go back now. "I don't know what to do," I said, finally breaking the silence. Looking at him, waiting for an answer, for guidance, for something that would help me make sense of what had happened and what would happen. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. He looked as lost as me. His eyes were filled with the same confusion, the same desire. "Me neither," he admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "But I also know that I don't want to ignore this, whatever this is. I can't pretend that last night didn't happen." His words were a confirmation of my feelings, a reassurance that we were in this together, that we were both willing to explore this dangerous forbidden path. He stood, and the way his muscles moved under his shirt was something I couldn't ignore. "We're playing with fire," I whispered. It was a warning, but it was also a confession of what I wanted, a confirmation of my desire for more. I could feel my heart pounding and the blood rushing to my cheeks. I was lost in the complex emotions swirling inside of me. He stopped in front of me, his eyes searching mine. He reached out, taking my hand in his. His touch sent shivers down my spine. "Maybe," he said, his voice a low murmur. "But sometimes fire's the only thing that can keep you warm." His words sent a jolt through my body. I looked at him and knew he was right, that we were both drawn to the thrill of the forbidden, to the danger of it all, and that it was something we couldn't resist. We didn't speak for a while. Instead, we just looked at each other, hands clasped tightly. Our unspoken desires lingered in the air, creating an unbearable yet exciting tension. I saw the same questions, doubts, and longing in his eyes. We were trapped in a twisted reality of our own making. I wasn't sure if we could ever escape it or if we wanted to. He pulled me closer, and our lips met. It was soft and hesitant at first, then grew intense. My body responded immediately. My hands explored his skin, and he moaned against my lips, as if feeling the same way I did. We broke the kiss, both of us breathing heavily. He took my hand again and led me out of the kitchen without a word. We returned to his room. He closed the door, a promise of what was to come. He pushed me against the door, and his lips found mine. This kiss was more desperate, more possessive. We were no longer resisting. I closed my eyes, embracing the moment, knowing we were on a path that would change everything. The house itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. We collapsed onto his bed, entwined in each other's arms. Our bodies moved together, hands exploring every inch of skin. Outside the room, the world faded away. The heat of his body, the taste of his lips, and our forbidden desires consumed us. We were lost in the moment, drowning in excitement. Our bodies craved more. Deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a long, complicated journey. Yet, despite everything, I wanted it. This was our new reality, and we were both ready to embrace it, whatever that meant, whatever the cost. I'm sure it's going to be expensive, but that doesn't seem to matter. Not now, not yet. We'll see what the future holds. If you were moved by this story, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more emotional and heart-wrenching LGBT tales. Don't forget to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And as always, share your thoughts and feelings in the comments below. We love hearing from you. Until next time, stay tuned to LGBT Stories.